Hello and welcome to what will be the first in a series of videos. Uh, I will probably come up with a better name for it later, but we'll just for now call D&D What the Fuck. So, I'm making these mostly just to document the crazy crap that's happened with my players and in the homebrewed world that I've made. So, if you're out there, any of you guys listening, this is your fault. So, where to start? So, I've been DMing now for probably about, I want to say about 8-9 years. So I've run a lot of different campaigns and a lot of different kinds of sessions. So I've run everything from Warhammer 40k, Warhammer Fantasy, Cyberpunk 2020, like I've run a ton of different systems, even Vampire the Masquerade and all those crazy ones. But by far, I love sticking to Pathfinder and 5e, just D&D, true D&D in general, as I've made my own world there, known as Varldom. So we've run several campaigns of Pathfinder in Varldom before, most of them taking place on the starter continent that I made, Maldros. But after a while of doing campaigns, I kind of decided I wanted to do more Victorian era stuff. You know, bells, whistles, steam engines, muskets, rifles, that kind of stuff. Child labor and drugs and horrible living conditions. And at least we got steamboats and good opera music, though, right? Right? So, I decided to kind of jump an epic forward into the Victorian period and take it away from the main continent that I've been working on, Maldros, to an archipelago stationed in between the two larger continents called Nirdheim. So I'll save you all the boring explanation about where Nirdheim is and what kind of states are, and I'll probably just put a pic right about right there. And it's an interesting place full of all these different kingdoms and stuff. But important thing is island nation, Victorian period. So the party when we first started was only about 4 people. So we had Torag, our intrepid mercenary, grizzled, old, bald. I believe he has an eye patch, unless he retconned that later. And he fits somewhere in a mixture between, I want to say, Robert Baratheon and maybe Judge Dredd in his sense of morals. Only a bit more flexible. Maybe Stannis and Robert Baratheon. Actually, we'll just call him a Baratheon, honestly, for the sake of it. So, the man is about as kind as a grizzly bear when it comes to most things. He makes up the muscle of the party, playing a fighter, of course. Then we have our resident cleric and bureaucrat, Goldman. And by resident cleric and bureaucrat, I mean bureaucrat. He actually made his character. He wasn't originally supposed to be in the campaign. He made it in about an hour because he really wanted to play with us. And I said, all right, I just we'll make something. So he ended up making a cleric that actually had a patron deity, or saint in this case, of bureaucracy, which ended up making him play something like a mixture between a Ferengi and a DMV employee, where he ends up knowing all of this fantastic laws and rules and legislation that he has to hold up. Really into contracts and stuff, hardcore into contracts, read the print, sign properly, all that nonsense. Followed by having Ray, our Magus gunslinger, which would become a problem once we played into 5e, and we had to figure out how to fix his character. But he basically played a class that we kind of changed around that was based around being a Magus and a gunslinger. And then we had Alice Vanderhart, the kind of the core of the party, playing an alchemist that was a noble. And the party sets out originally knowing each other. Goldman, or DMV Ferengi, is the assigned kind of assayer, I guess you would say, of the mission that they went on when they first met up. Ray is her lifelong kind of friend. Torag is basically a bodyguard. And Alice is, of course, a well-educated noble who wanted to go on this archaeological dig, essentially. And they travel on their way back, encounter some wildlife, typical D&D stuff. Important thing is they make it back to dock. So they make it back to dock, and Alice has something of a drug problem. So her alchemist is kind of like the mad scientist, but also with like a tinge of a drug problem with opium, based on a kind of a tragic backstory that went on. Now she's played a bit crazy, so you'll have to bear with her. But she has a meetup with her father at the docks when they get back, who basically explains to her that her sister is being married off to Ivanov Dracius of House Krakenfell, and it will lead to prosperity and a union between houses and alliances and, you know, all that great political stuff that I really, really hope everyone likes, and that I'm not totally wasting my time. But anyway, he has a big talk with her about how she needs to be a responsible and good noble, and, you know, the family's counting on you, and be all you can be a good noble. At which point, once she's done with this talk, decides to go with 4 members of the Royal Guard and the rest of the party to her favorite opium den, a place called Alcazar's in the Market District. So she goes to Alcazar's and decides that it's time to stock up on opium. What else? And I guess it was, 2 for 1 day, and she didn't want to miss it. So she goes to Alcazar's, and Alcazar is having business problems. I mean, not that there's a lack of customers, but that someone else is taking his customers. And asks Alice to look in on this problem for him to see if maybe she can help him. She asks for a reward, and naturally he says he'll give her a golden opium pipe with some really ornate decorations on it. Sounds nice. So she agrees, even though the party's kind of looking at each other at this point like, what the hell did we just sign up for? So she leaves and heads towards this opium establishment. And the party is busy planning and scheming on how they're going to kind of get into this opium den and kind of see how maybe they can help Alcazar and maybe root out this guy's contacts and suppliers and all this. Alice, in the meantime, is very, very quiet. So they get there, and they think, well, maybe she's just been quiet, letting us do all the heavy lifting. So they get there, and they decide that Torag will wait inside, the Royal Guard will wait outside, and Goldman, who is probably the best with diplomacy and persuasion amongst the group, will go with Ray and Alice downstairs to try and negotiate and talk to this guy about maybe getting a tour around the place and trying to find out what they can. On the surface, this all seems very sensible. They go inside the opium den, and as they head down to the opium floor, after they convince the man that they're there to kind of see their way around, Goldman is doing wonderfully, having a nice conversation with the guy, discussing, weather and opium and profit margins and stuff like that. All kind of basic stuff, rolling really well in his diplomacy and persuasion. And just before they get to the main counter at this opium den, Alice, who's kind of just been looking around kind of quietly the whole time, looks around. This place is really crowded. Decides, better do something. And Goldman's up here, mid-sentence, talking to this guy. And Alice just whips out a grenade. No warning, no nothing. Whips out a grenade. Chucks the thing across the room. Lit fuse and all. I've never heard a party more quiet than in that singular moment when the hissing fuse of the grenade is going off as it's flying midair into an opium den full of addicts. Now keep in mind, this is Medan, so it's the capital of the Grand Duchy, that she's like part of the noble family of. And she's tossed this grenade. It lands. I said, alright, roll damage. That woman rolled very high damage. She took out pillars. She took out opium addicts. She took out opium supplies. And before the party had even known it, there was about 8 dead people, a bunch of people screaming, a fire started, and guards running after them. They had just enough time to grab Alice by the collar, drag her upstairs as they yelled to Torag to run, Indiana Jones style, out the door and to the royal guard. At which point, as the shop owner and his guards chase after them, she tells her royal guards that this man has attacked her and that they need to protect her. At which point, they do. This man, seeing he's about to get the ultimate beatdown, decides that it's not worth it, but complains that she has just burned down his establishment. And the party decides, there's a train leaving to this royal wedding we were supposed to go to. Let's get there quickly before this man calls the guards and actually causes us more problems. So they make their way back to Alcazar's quickly. And as she turns in her quest, quote unquote, she gets her reward just in time for Goldman to keep shaking his head and staring off with a 1,000-yard stare, wondering what had just happened to him this whole time, before snapping back to reality and dragging her and the rest of the party to the train. Just as the commotion reaches its crescendo, as the smoking building catches on fire, they board the train, Alice waving her hat out the window, Indiana Jones style, as the locals shake their fists in impotent rage. And that is the story of how Alice Vanderhart, Noble of Peloponnese, bombed an opium den.